Great. Well, welcome everyone. As everyone enters the room, thank you so much for giving up an hour of your precious time to join us for this fourth iteration of circular economy learnings, this time with an industry focus. We'll just give a couple of minutes until everyone enters the room and we'll get started. But really looking forward to hearing from Hayley and Helen and their perspectives on what they picked up. It's been a really fascinating reflection series because everybody obviously has different experiences and different skills, different perspectives, and it's just been really fascinating to see what gets picked up by everybody. So yeah, so we'll look forward to hearing from them in a few minutes. But yeah, we'll just give it a couple of minutes just for everyone to join in. And we'll get started shortly. Okay, with that, we might get started. So hello and welcome everyone to this exciting series of webinars. So as I mentioned, this webinar series has been focused on our 2023 ACE Hub organised European study tour. So thank you again for choosing to spend an hour of your time with us today to hear from our speakers. My name is Dr. Nicole Garofano, and I'm the Head of Circular Economy Development for Planet Arc. Planet Arc proudly acknowledges our program establishment partner, the Australian Government, and also our founding partners, KPMG and Alexis Energy, and also our official sponsor with Bingo Industries. Our mission is to facilitate a circular economy and carbon neutral transition towards our mission is to facilitate a transition to a circular economy in Australia. And what we're doing with that is creating a national reference platform for circular economy knowledge and collaboration. And of course, collaboration and knowledge are core parts of today's webinar. So I'd first like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which we're all joining from today and pay my respects to their elders past, present and emerging. I'm joining from the lands of the Jagera and Turrbal peoples in Meanjin in Brisbane, and I extend that acknowledgement to all Indigenous peoples joining us for the event today. So today is our fourth event. We're excited to be able to present this, and we've titled it Industry Transformations. And we're joined by two more of our delegates, Helen Millicer and Hayley Jarick. And Hayley and Helen will discuss transformations that are being pursued by governments and business in industry. And some of the industries we'll be talking to are plastics, textiles, and the built environment, with a focus obviously on the European experience. So they'll delve into the key topics such as sustainable materials, circular economy policies, targets, and practices, and the really interesting and inspiring pieces of collaboration that are driving progress in the EU and certainly worldwide. So this event is being recorded and will be available on our YouTube channel in the coming week. So the link to the recording will be added to our follow-up email as soon as that's ready. So sometime between now and next Thursday or so. If you have any questions throughout the webinar, we're inviting you to use the Q&A function for this event, and all those questions will be recorded. If we don't get to all the questions, then we'll group them together and look to provide some grouped responses with our email next week. So at least we can get back to you on that. So we've got so much to cover in this next 60 minutes. So let's get started. Now, if you joined us for the first and second webinar series, you'll know that these learnings are informed by that study tour. We designed the study tour to coincide with the World Circular Economy Forum in Helsinki in Finland. The tour also included a week in the Netherlands and with our delegates, and then we also spent, Paul Klemenko, our Chief Sustainability Advisor, and myself spent some time in Sweden, France, and the UK. So it was a very informative and inspirational time that was spent by all. We received incredible support to organise this tour in collaboration with a number of partners, including the diplomatic missions of the Netherlands and Australia, Business Finland in Australia, the Swedish Embassy and the Swedish Australian Chamber of Commerce, and our own Austrade in DFAT, both in Australia and in Europe. And we had many generous contributors of time through all of our meetings in all the countries that you're seeing on the screen now. So thank you again to all of you for your assistance in creating such a valuable opportunity. And it's the delegates. All of our delegates, shown on this slide, chose to invest their own time and resources to be part of this incredible learning experience. This series has existed thanks to these individuals who are sharing their reflections, and you would have heard in our past webinars from Debbie O'Byrne, Tanya Hyde, Bronwyn Voice, Emily Dunstan, Rolla Fogel, and Eloise Lobsey. And today we're hearing from Hayley and Helen, who I'll introduce you to soon. Before this, though, as a quick reminder, the objectives of the study tour were these, and it's important to reiterate that we are looking to share the learnings. That's really the core focus of this webinar series. The study tour showed that we in this part of the world, we can learn a great deal from Europe, but we also know that there's a lot of good activity that's happening here in Australia. And now on to our speakers. As mentioned in this webinar, we're joined by Helen Millicer, the CEO of One Planet Consulting, and Hayley Jarick, the Company Secretary and CEO of the Supply Chain Sustainability School. Both of these women wear amazing number of hats, and we're super excited to have them joining us today. And I'm not going to do their bios justice at all. So if you're not connected to them on LinkedIn, I absolutely recommend you getting on there and inviting an invite to connect. But as a quick summary, Helen's day job is the CEO of One Planet Consulting. She's got more than 30 years experience in leadership and executive governance in government, industry, and business. A fairly recent piece of work that Helen's contributed to is the 2023 report for the Australian government, which is titled Enabling Design for Environmental Good. And I think we'll hear from Helen a little bit on that shortly. That report recommends 10 major changes for the eco-design of all products into the Australian market, which is pivotal, as we know, for circular economy. And Helen is also a key advisor on EPR for plastics and is the ministerial appointee to the inaugural Waste and Resource Recovery Board for the Tasmanian government. But look at Helen's bio on her LinkedIn because there's many other things that she does. Hayley's day job is the Company Secretary and CEO of the Supply Chain Sustainability School, but she also contributes in various capacities to the Responsible Steel Board, World Wildlife Fund's MECLA project control groups, and is the chair also of Planet Ark's Australian Circular Economy Hub procurement working group. So we're fortunate to have Hayley joining us in that capacity. Hayley has an MBA from the Australian Graduate School of Management and a Bachelor of Commerce majoring in International Business and Legal Studies from the University of Wollongong. So as I say, welcome. Thank you so much for joining us both. We know that preparing for these events takes work, and so we really appreciate that from both of you. And as I mentioned, please connect with these wonderful, inspiring leaders on LinkedIn. But for now, I will hand over to Helen to kick off today's presentations. Thanks so much, Helen.
Thank you for that. And yes, let me see if I can enable you to see my screen. Can you reply?
Yep.
Yep. Brilliant.
All good.
Excellent. So indeed, thank you so much, Nicole, for the introduction, and to Planet Ark for coordinating that splendid tour. Highly recommend, if anyone has an opportunity to participate in something like that again, that they grab it with both hands and go. I'm on the Wurundjeri lands in the Kulin Nation here in Victoria in sunny Melbourne, and this was a whirlwind tour in April, May last year. As Nicole has expressed, we went to several countries, and it was just the magnificent thing to have a group learning experience. So my next slide, let's see how we go. Here we go. All right, so these are some of the things I think you've already mentioned. Thanks for you for that, Nicole. There's a few other things there for disclosure as well. The one thing I will say is that this was my second global tour after travelling for the Churchill Scholarship in 2018, and I was delighted to be able to go back to meet with some of those people, and indeed we were able to meet them as a group as well. So I've had a long history and time in sustainability, and this was a culmination of my work in both climate change and also circularity. So what I'll cover today is what are the 10 recommended actions for Australia and what's happening in the EU. We'll talk firstly about the EU, then the Netherlands, and then I'll dive down into Amsterdam. So I thought that this would be a good structure because it would help people appreciate what's happening at different levels of government and within industry and how it's coordinated and information and projects are trialled and taken from trial to full scale and perhaps to national or EU scale in their development. It's a very iterative process. Fundamentally, Europe is what I'd call, they campaign and work for Team Europe. And all that they do and think about is very much to that end and objective. They see themselves as this last point says, aiming to be a competitive economic bloc versus US, China, Russia, and that their positioning on that, their value proposition and their future is around high standards for circular low emissions product, which is available for the global market. And they reinforce that through their trade negotiations and their laws on trade. So how have they done this? Their waste hierarchy and their greenhouse gas emissions are factored into policy and program decisions, reporting and assessments. It's quite mature now, it's well established. They've been doing this for nigh on nearly 20 years. Circular economy, they recognise as a critical means to cut greenhouse gas emissions and pollution. It's part of nature restoration and biodiversity. They see them as all interlinked. And they're also recognising that it's fundamental for supply chain risks for them as a significant economy that is resource constrained, for them seeing the product that comes into the market as incredibly valuable for it to be available for their economic bloc for the longer term. They see solid policy development pathways, as I mentioned there, integrating research, test trials and strategies with targets which are measured and a very collaborative, well-funded program. And they're moving from what we might call directives to their member states to actually now putting in place legislation and regulations which are more enforceable and more immediate. They're introducing more bans on and closures on and phase outs, funds and penalties. So I've just given you some examples there. But moving on. So here in Australia, this is the report that I and RMIT and Arcadis produced for the Australian government and was delivered to them in 2022 and published last year. These are, I put this here for us for reflection to show what we need to have here in Australia that we currently don't have and who are the responsible entities. So it's not just governments, it's professional and industry bodies, educators and trainers, designers, manufacturers, producers, obviously those that actually sell into the market, users, and then those that are in the two dominant chains, the product domain and the materials domain. If you want to know more, you can find out more about the report and the summary there, but we've basically recommended that Australia should have an eco-design circular strategy, that we improve stewardship, reuse and repair, align to global best practices, eco-design innovation fund for innovation around supply chains, change the way we manage our landfill fees, improve financial and regulatory instruments for negative externalities, a green procurement program, and vastly improve our learning and upskilling of people in the existing workforce as plus education. So with that in mind, it's appropriate now to launch into what's happening in the EU. So firstly, with plastic packaging, for example, in the EU, this shows you their recycling rate of plastic packaging waste. This is not their recovery rate, this is their recycling rate. So the target that was established by the EU was for 20% recycling. That means beyond the MRF, that is what goes in as plastic pellets for use into something else. Unfortunately, in Australia, this is where we are. We do not report in most material streams on this kind of level. We report on collection. It's only in packaging that we report on content. What are they doing in Europe? Because they're not satisfied even with that significant progress. They're going from a directive to regulations, and these need to be fully implemented by 2030 or 2035. The targets are significant. They are to have an overall reduction on the quantity of packaging that goes into the EU market. They're mandating CDS, use of labels, and the phase out of unnecessary packaging, not just plastics, but packaging. They're mandating recyclability of all packaging formats by 2030. Eco-design is to minimise substances of concern, weight and volume. They're setting targets for reuse in key areas of packaging, whether it's used for household appliances, food service, beverage, transport packaging, and targets for recycled content. Obviously, they vary according to material stream and capacity of facilities. And they're limiting compostables to things like tea bags, coffee, single-serve units, and fruit stickers. Not insignificant, and obviously that'll have influence globally as well. They're also establishing targets for product eco-design, again, also by regulations. This is being established through a particular instrument that they have for energy efficiency. They're using that established law and the regulations to bring in eco-design as regulations. A provisional agreement has been reached between the EU Parliament and the EU Council in December just last year, and that includes targets on and issues on labelling, lifespan, repairability and recyclability. And their list initially are these items, and it's going to continue to expand over time. So considerable change will be underway in Europe in those sorts of areas. So that's what's happening at the European level. And as I say, these are now regulations which are going to bind all 27 member states. If we take now to the Netherlands and their approach with the circular economy strategy, their strategy is not dissimilar to the one we've recommended or the approach we've considered for Australia in terms of a supply chain and how to, what they call, narrow the loop, substitute where possible, slow the loop, i.e. to keep things in use for as long as possible through product repair and reuse, and only at the end, which was our second loop, do we move to materials as opposed to products, which is about closing the loop, i.e. to bring it back again. They have joint targets for both circularity and emissions. So as you can see here, they're looking for a 50% reduction of primary fossil raw materials, a reduction in scope 3 chain emissions, and also for 100% fossil-free climate neutral products by 2050. So they've bound the two together. It's implicit in their work. Here's a sample. This is one of their, within that overall strategy, they have also sectoral strategies. This one is on the work they're doing on circular construction, a whole wide range of documents and product and materials and consultations that have been undertaken as they move forward on this. And these are some of the documents they've produced over that time. If we dive into that particular one, here's an example of what they're doing with civil construction. And this is not just recycling. So this is about rejuvenation of road, so how they deal with asphalt. This is what they're doing with road furniture, that they are actually repairing road furniture and repairing road signage. And you can see here that their business case is consideration of not just cost, but also CO2 reduction. And what would that be over a particular time frame? In terms of what they're doing on circular procurement in the Netherlands, there are many elements that they're bringing to bear. Circular procurement or green procurement is compulsory for all government entities. It's not voluntary, it is compulsory. They have a range of items such as a red list. They have their EPR schemes. They have a number of sustainable certified organisations. They have eco labels, which are required to be referenced in procurement documents. They also have tax and incentives, financial tax and incentives that they use. Here's some of their monitoring and assessments of that. This shows what are the subsidies and what are they in. There's energy generation, food and feed, and waste resource recovery, and their projections forward and actual. Here you can see the quantum of euros that have been invested, what was their projection, and what's the percentage into those that is attributable to circularity. And you can see that it varies, but it's not inconsiderable. It's a couple of million euros. In terms of Amsterdam, I'll be quick, I'll finish up. Again, the next level down, they likewise have the same sorts of targets linking into the national targets for circularity and low emissions. They have set this out very clearly with some timetables and when things have to be achieved by, and their work program that goes towards that, such as designing their monitor system. This is their circular monitor system whereby data is entered on both tonnes avoided and CO2 as well. And you can see it's raw materials as well as recycling. They have a strategy themselves focused on food, consumer goods, and built environment. This is at the Amsterdam level. And what's interesting was that the national government went out and said, okay, regions, tell us what it is you'd like to focus on. We've got a list of priority areas to be addressed across the Netherlands. Pick the ones you want to do. And Amsterdam said, we're going to be the lead in our nation looking into what can be done around textiles. And this then informs national and other jurisdiction efforts. And so this is their particular focus, effort and activity. How are they doing this? It's through a collaborative work program with Netherlands-based retailers and manufacturers. They've signed agreements such as a denim deal for recovery of denims. They have put funding into a number of these initiatives. They've brought and facilitated parties together to work on such things as circular aprons, collection from hotels of fabrics and sheets and so forth. So not inconsiderable what they're doing there. So in summary, what am I saying? The EU is a powerful economic bloc of 27 nations that are pushing forward. Their planning also includes future scenarios, modelling of scarcity, what's going to happen, we're running out of global sand, which makes glass, etc. So they're really thinking carefully about supply chain and their sovereignty and capacity to operate as a modern trading bloc into the future. They have extensive collaborations, extraordinary work towards these global and national goals, and they use all policy, all levers that they have to their advantage. That is policy, financial, legal, regulatory, and economic, in order to bring about system change and impact. I think that that's probably it from me, Nicole.
Thank you, Helen. That's wonderful. Thanks so much for your presentation. I think we might throw straight over to Hayley and get your presentation, then we'll come back to some discussion at the end. Thank you, Helen. Thanks, Hayley.
Well, thank you. Thank you so much, Helen, for kicking it off and really coming down from that top view down into the tour of getting into the nitty-gritty. What I'm going to take you through are a very visual and auditory sense, so less reading than what Helen had on her slides. But really sort of taking you through some photos that I sort of took really key learnings from throughout the tour, and how they can then be relevant to in an Australian context, and what we can really bring back. Because I think similar to what Nicole was saying at the start, there's some really great things happening in Australia. Europe are progressing forward with a circular economy, but I'm also really mindful that circularity is a solution to a Western problem of overconsumption a lot of the time. And so how can we really draw back to some of the learnings from Australia as well? So I'll begin by acknowledging that I'm coming to you from Gadigal land. So we've got a true East Coast coverage on the webinar today from the Australian context, and I'm going to take you through a few things. I'm going to begin by this is ultimately, if I learned nothing else from the study tour, and if you give nothing back, the one thing that I tell everybody that everybody is most interested in hearing about are the 10 R's of circularity. So Professor Jacqueline Kramer, who gave us so much time and attention, came out to Australia, but also spent a lot of time with us when we were in the Netherlands. Initially did this part as part of research into a materials sense in order to prioritize exactly where we should be spending our time. And I think Helen touched on this in part of her strategies as well, but around where's the things we should be spending our time on. A lot of our time in this sense is spent on recycling. And certainly in the Netherlands, they had previously spent a lot of time on recovery. So they incinerated a lot of their waste and turned it into energy. And there has since been a ban on that moving forward. So if your product is recyclable, you have to recycle it. You're not allowed to incinerate it. And certainly all the people with the incineration technologies are looking to move out of the Netherlands into different parts of the world as they reduce their incineration capacity, looking to do all of the other strategies on this mix ahead of time. So with even just keeping this in mind, like the number one step is refuse. Do we actually need to get anything new in the first place? Can we keep using what we've already got? Then reducing what we do have once we do have it. And then looking towards the other things around redesigning, reuse, repairing, refurbishing, remanufacturing if you need to in that sense. And Helen certainly spoke to some of the construction examples there where they were quite literally taking the road infrastructure off, cleaning it up, re-galvanizing it, and then putting it back on the road. And then looking to repurpose with another function. I think these are all sort of things that are key, and really sort of looking around the tour. I think there were a lot of gems, even just not from conversations, but in looking around how their culture works, and how inherently these things sort of take place. So I'm going to start off with Blue City. So we had, this is the home of the Holland Circular Hotspot. And if you are looking at the photos there, you'll probably notice that this looks very much like an indoor aquatic centre, and that's because it's exactly what it used to be. So they were going to knock this down and use it as a redevelopment site. And the people from the conglomerate of people that moved in actually said, no, we're going to leave it exactly as is. We can fix bits of it up, and then we can see how we can repurpose this, all of the infrastructure and the framing around this into a new purpose. So noticeably, the water has disappeared. A lot of the tile work has been repaired. If you look at that big picture on the right, if you do sort of a 180 and look back around the other end of the building is where the photo on the very left is from. So it's split into a couple of sections. Upstairs has been converted into a bar, and downstairs a series of offices. Now, what they found within this structure was that the shell itself wasn't very energy efficient. So what they did was that they built cubes within cubes. So all the office spaces that have been built inside essentially have an internal cube structure that then moderates a lot of the heating and cooling. And if you look closely enough at the photo on the left, you'll realise that none of the top windows there are straight. And that's because they managed to recover all of those glass palings, and frameworks from a different project, and they didn't quite fit the space. So instead of just not being able to utilise that material, they forego the straight line structure down the hallway and actually use the material that they could recover from a different site and repurpose it to be used here by just creating that zigzag effect of the windows as they go down. I think this is symbolic of a few things that are quite ingenious in this sense of not only they encapsulating that this outer shell, but this inner shell, we can actually create these different zones for heating and cooling. Not so much cooling, but a lot of heating. And also foregoing this hole doesn't need to be a perfectly straight line because there's a great artistic benefit in having it zigzaggy all the way through. Another part of the study tour that really stood out to me, and specifically from a building construction sense, was we went to visit the city of Harlem. Now, they were winners of the European Rising Innovation City Award in 2022. We were lucky enough to get a welcome by the mayor of their city, and then taken out on a tour with a lot of other European dignitaries that were coming around to investigate as well. Looking into the city itself and why it won that award. And specifically, we all took a bus tour out to what they call the C District. So you can Google the C District and really have a look at around. But I think the thing that really stood out for me in this C District is that there are a number of businesses all co-located on a previous industrial estate. And what's different that I think about this is these are all for-profit private enterprises. So this isn't a government initiative. This isn't a handout or a not-for-profit initiative or something that's just there for the environmental good or for the social good. These businesses are out there to make money. And each one of them is set up, and they understand that working together and collaborating in that environment where they quite literally have series of garages lined up next to each other and they work together on solving problems. Getting that many designers and industrial designers and creative minds together in one place at one time can actually solve a lot of their problems, and they're all doing it in order to make a living. So it's quite a different sort of space, and one that I found quite inspiring that we can all sort of take from a commercial sense. The picture on the left, if for those of you that are trying to figure out what that is a 3D printer. This one specifically prints concrete. So what they were doing there, and this the company that does this is 3DMZ. They have a lot of these different workshops for thinking how can we 3D print things differently and use things in a different way. The picture on the right there is their interlocking brick system that they all printed up to go together. The building that you can see there is they went, oh, our shed's too small for what we need a whole separate building. So they literally just picked one up that was going to be knocked down from somewhere else and shipped it in on the back of a truck, and then said, okay, well, we need to reinforce. There were some things that we need to fix walls and insulate. So they built the outer shell of that and used this interlocking bricking system as an external cladding function on literally their building that was shipped in on the back of a truck and just sat in the paddock out the back. So they 3D printed all of what you can see there, and then are really working towards that. They do other really cool and neat things as well, which is around custom 3D printing the concrete of the concrete staircases. So by doing this, they can replace individual sections that have been missing, but also using a really lightweight design. So you can see there that it's not a solid concrete base, but they're hollowed out, and that they engineer the structure to provide the strength required, and then have it as an interlocking system so that you can fit it into place quite easily. I mean, 3D printing has a number of amazing applications. I mean, furniture is one, and why not keep it really artistic and different in terms of this layout for some different poolside seating. And one of the other areas that I think that is really unique in terms of using materials in different ways, and certainly applies to the built environment, is around the restoration of historical buildings. So in Australia, we're lucky if we have something a couple of 100 years old. As you can imagine, over in Europe, we're talking thousands of years old. And so what this particular company was doing in the Netherlands was actually going through some of the cathedrals and some of the museums, and actually doing full 3D scans of a lot of artifacts to try and preserve them and restore them so that the replicas of these items can be put on display. Or if in fact, a gargoyle falls off a building, they can actually replace it with the exact gargoyle that was there before, just a reprint quite literally of that structure to be able to go back on. So if you look at somewhere like, certainly when I was at a separate holiday, it was actually like walking up and down the top of Notre Dame, and gargoyles are one of my favorite things in the world to look at. Certainly all of those can be 3D scanned and printed and get exact replicas of all of those in terms of restoring and maintaining some of those truly historic ideas. This particular garage I found quite interesting. So the gentleman in there quite literally calls his work the PlayStation, for good reason. Is he tackles his industrial design tackles a lot of interesting issues. So the chair that you can see standing that's literally next to him on the left is just from recovered materials. He does great things by like taking the floors out of old train carriages, and cutting them up for different things, utilizing the steel and insulation intact, and then using that composite to make other materials. And the chair on the right is actually not the chair, it's a water tank. So this was a unique design that interlocks the system so that you can have garden benches, or if you're in a school system on the external side of a building, to try and use this as a retrofit solution. So you can sort of increase and store either grey water or rainwater through different storage tank systems, and still have an outdoor seating setting as well as a dual purpose function, which I think is quite innovative in terms of, you know, what is this? It's not a chair, it's a water tank. And so thinking really outside the box around how we can do multiple things together and have dual purpose things, but also solves a really interesting problem of retrofitting water tanks into existing infrastructure. Now, so if you think that blue image looks spanky on your screen just to try and look at it, that is a massive piece of recycled plastic, and it does just as much wonder to your eyes in person as it does on that screen. The real life version of that was bigger than a doorway, and I couldn't resist taking a photo of it. And the gentleman that used this technology around grinding down the plastic into little things and then creating these amazing technologies make a number of different things. Probably the most interesting that I thought of is one that I've displayed where they made a portable chess set for the Amsterdam Library, where you can literally go in there and they've made all the different chess pieces out of different buildings and artifacts. So it's a truly unique and customized piece, utilizing a lot of the upcycled materials into creating that chess piece set, which I think looks quite beautiful from the different plastics that are involved in the different shades and being able to sort them into different applications. So truly, I mean, I think there's some, I found great inspiration from I have a problem I'm trying to solve. How can I solve that with a circular mindset? And then also I need a product, you know, I have a material, what can I do with it? And I think that from a design point of view, they're the two magical spaces to play with of what can I do with this? And I have a problem that I'm trying to solve and come down. And where those two worlds meet, I think is where the beauty exists. I think also the personal inspiration from this study tour comes from meeting sort of really great people that are doing great things. So I will unapologetically say that I was completely fangirling meeting the team at Circular Economy. For those that don't know who they are, so they are the authors of the Circularity Gap Report and a lot of other great work that they do. Really just being able to get in their headspace and talk through some of the problems that they've found, even just measuring and the types of metrics, being able to get into being able to do that, how they solved some of the problems around accessing data and being able to get in that space was actually quite interesting to talk through. So for those of you that are looking to really sort of sit back and look at what metrics and things, I know that the ACE Hub is doing some great works in this space, but certainly if you're not looking at the Circularity Gap Report and getting ideas and solutions in that space, it's definitely a go-to place to be able to get in there and access all of those. This building, the picture doesn't really do it justice, but if you go onto the circle.nl website, you'll really be able to go through and read the whole story about the creation of this circle building. So for those that aren't familiar, ABN AMRO commissioned this building, and it's right next to their headquarters. And what they were doing was they said, okay, we need this additional building. And the challenge in designing it was that we wanted to use minimal single-use and raw materials as possible. They wanted as energy neutral as possible, and everything designed to be disassembled later. So as you can imagine, they came up with a stack of challenges in being able to do that. So the ground that we're all standing on there is actually the roof of the car park. There are solar, just reflective light circles in the ground, so that they don't have to use as much electricity to light the car park underneath. That also presented some challenges around turning that into a full garden because of the weight issues. So in order to get the coverage of garden area that they wanted, they actually put it up onto the walls. There are some great stuff in there. They also have a stack of underground rooms and meeting spaces. They did a whole stack of urban mining in order to find things in order to bring into this building, so that instead of commissioning raw material usage. And they also did really cool things. So the insulation in the walls of the building is actually made from denim from the employees of the other building. So it's like quite literally everybody coming in one day and whacking, bring in 8-year-old jeans, and then getting in there to shred them up and put them inside the walls. There's a stack of other cool things of quick things that I'll just show you as we go through. So one is around just painting differently. So turn your artwork, your walls into artwork. You don't have to have the same color all the way through. So you can take, all the half tins of paints of which you can have in different areas and bring them all back in. Utilizing existing buildings by putting turning an open courtyard into an internal building structure, and really just sort of utilizing and adding in a skeleton, a weight-bearing skeleton around that. There's some art in terms of the stairwells in Australia, I think, have turned into these concrete, lightless dungeons of just being fire evacuation zones as opposed to being central pieces of artworks within a building. And if you're just crazy like me, you take photos of all stairwells that you walk under. But I think it can create the natural light and the beauty in this stairwell, as well as creating as a functional place where people want to use the stairs as opposed to using the lifts. Energy, increasing the energy efficiency within the buildings is quite interesting as well. The other fun thing that I saw is in the trains. So not only do you get like free Wi-Fi in the train system to be able to do things, but this is the fun carriage of if you have kids on a train, you can quite literally sit on a train and have a whole play area for them to play. There's a slippery dip in there. You can sit. There's soft play areas. You can shut the gate. There's a gate at the top of the stairs at the back there, so they can't fall down the stairs in the train. But quite literally make a fun experience for kids, so that as they grow up, they have positive learning experiences around using public transport, as opposed to, you know, if it's sort of that squishy, dark, smelly place that they don't really want to go to. So I really like the idea of turning all these environments into having the positive mental spaces as you work through. Nicole's already shared this one photo. So obviously then we went from the Netherlands, went over to the World Circular Economy Forum, and there were a stack of speakers during the first couple of days. But I think what I found most informative was the last 2 days were all these what they call accelerator sessions, which are breakout workshops, where quite literally the thousands of delegates that came together from around the world all got together to solve some big problems. And so I would do a lot of work in the steel sector and spend a lot of time dealing with the role of scrap in the steel sector and how we can go about doing that, amongst other things. And then I think I want to bring something back to where everyone's coming back to in terms of coming back and thinking about the end of this webinar as well, is having time to reflect. So we deliberately scheduled in at the end of this 2-week session a trip to sit in a room over on the island of, I'm going to pronounce this wrong, Suomalina, and really just reflect on everything that we had sort of seen and done over the last couple of weeks, and then what does that mean? What's the so what for Australia? And also what's the so what for us individually and as we move through there. So there's a stack of things that came out for me about that message. And one of them was around, you know, starting from the top left of that corner, is to stop and smell the roses, all the other flowers, and look at the bees and everything as you go through, and really taking advantage of nature as you see it. So things like on the sidewalks, all the verges on the sides of the roads there are all living verges. It's not like a grass that needs to be mowed or anything. And that's just the norm. And quite interestingly, having when we took bus rides with the Sea District tour of people from all around Europe, they found it quite interesting that they go, why would you put grass on a verge at the side of the road that you then have to maintain? And that sounds ridiculous. Why don't you just put living plants there that they could just be? Things like in Blue City, their directory of all their listings of companies have photos of everybody that works there. And that really does create just that individual personal touch to these different things. You know, there are a stack of different companies all co-locating and working together, but really getting to know each other and understanding who each other is, so that when you walk past them in the hallway, you can actually go, oh, that's Hayley from that place, and oh, I can chat to them about that, and really getting to know that human connection. I thought was a really great idea of just literally putting faces to names as you're working in collab spaces is an idea. There are a lot of people that shared their different tools and techniques for working with people through this space, which I found quite useful. I love the idea of not getting rid of all of the animals from the bottom of the aquatic centre, and quite literally people now have weddings in this space, and we'll go and have a picture with the elephant that used to be at the bottom of the aquatic centre. On the left in the middle there are 2 different fences that I've never seen before. You know, this whole idea of I'll just pick up loose bits of wood in any way, shape or form and nail them together to create my fence, because that's just all that's needed there at the edge of my path, rather than actually then commissioning something from scratch or having it forested from far away and being shipped in. The fence on the very left in the middle there is actually in one of their equivalents of national parks, where they're scraping up all the loose leaves that come down every autumn. They literally would just store them inside this fence space. So there's the 2, literally just a timber cage with a wire frame, and then every year they clean up, they put the leaf litter in this space, and so some of the fences are worked all the way up to the top, and some of them are still working. But what a great ingenious solution of how to compost leaves and create fencing at the same time. So that's the end of my slides and being able to work through to sort of take you through my my personal reflections. Two things that I did promise to do at the end of it, and certainly in that region, was a couple of things. One is create circular economy learning resources on the Supply Chain School website, and so we did come back, and there's a whole page of collating a stack of different learning resources from the trip and being able to move forward to be able to share and piece them together for people looking to learn about circular economy in the Australian context. And the other one is just to create custom training for those that are looking to be the people to make the change. So one of the things that we did realise was that there aren't enough Professor Jekyll and Kramers in the world. And certainly we need people in order to collaborate and be the transition brokers in this space to be able to move through. So we've actually created some bespoke training with all of the skills required, not just from a technical circular economy sense, but from the governance sense, and also dynamics of managing people and keeping things in grooves to move that forward. So there's just a couple of the personal things that I could do in this sense to be able to get through, and taken at the end. I'm going to throw open now to go back to Nicole for Q&A session.
Thank you, Hayley. That was amazing. Just looking at all of your photos, I'm just so impressed as to how much I mean, I know your mind works amazingly well, but it's just seeing all the detail that you picked up from all those conversations. It's really, really exciting. Thank you for your presentation. Helen, did you want to come back as well, and we'll just get on to some questions that have been posed from the group. Maybe if you want to just take down your slide. Are you sharing your slides, Hayley, or is that Ro that's doing that?
No, so mine shouldn't be shared anymore.
Okay. Great. So got some good questions. I think one question to think about, if we can get some time for both of you, we'll get to the audience questions first. But how has what have you learned informed your work today? So if we can get some time for that at the end, I'll come back to that question. Fascinating to see how everyone's applied all of this back here at home. But the first question is an easy one. Can we get a link to the report of the recommendations for your report, Helen? Absolutely. We can send that through with our summary when you get that next week. So Sally, hello, Sally. Thanks for joining us. Thanks to Helen. So the 60% of plastic recycling is actually recycled into other products. Do you know what the collection rate? And she can also take that offline with you. Maybe we'll connect you with Sally on those questions. Thank you for your questions. Darren has asked, did the issue of medical waste come up? And how would the EU address use of single plastics in the medical field?
I can answer that if you like, because I think if that relates to medical plastic and medical plastics and packaging, so in that slide I indicated that the packaging, there are 2030 and 2035 are the timeframes for the introduction of these various measures, and that recognises that for medical grade product, pharmaceuticals, food contact applications and so forth, it will take longer for there to be adoption of some of these measures. Some of the technology is still in its infancy stage for the processing or handling or the changeover of medical contact and food contact packaging for it to have, for example, recycled content. I do know that it is an area of special work and concern. There are associations working closely with EU government officials to identify what the challenges are in the healthcare sector. Likewise around the food and pharmaceutical sector too. So I hope that answers that.
Thanks, Helen.
But as I indicated, there are a range of they're kind of, what they do is really quite interesting, is they identify a problem and they understand that it can be really, sometimes the solutions can be quite specific. So if we take, for example, what's happening in Amsterdam with the textiles project, they recognize that the textiles coming out of the hotels is quite different to that which is coming out of retail, which is quite different, which is coming out of the home. So they don't bundle it all together. They're looking for industry specific kinds of solutions.
Interesting. Okay. Thanks, Helen. So any other questions? We've got one here, but please feel free to pop your questions in the Q&A. Belle, thank you for joining us, and great to see you here. So Belle says, wow, thanks. So much circular inspiration and practical examples. Love the kiddies section of the train. I too love that. I missed that one. Well done, Hayley. But I can imagine an Australian risk officer having a heart attack over that concept. So, Hayley, did you get a sense of, or can you reflect on how the culture in Europe is quite different that might enable these types of innovative projects for us?
Oh, absolutely. And I think that this is one thing that particularly we got a big wind of in Finland as well. And that is around that, this culture of play, this culture of get out there and exercise, talking about a country that quite literally everybody has a bunker in their basements with at least 60 days of food just in case Russia invades. Like they're used to having, very intense risk, high risk things happen in their country. And so they have this very different culture of, well, we need to let our kids play while they can. This is a country that is in quite literally in darkness for a few months of the year, and then in light the rest of the year. And yet every day, even in the middle of winter when it's pitch black, kids go out and play for a couple of hours every day. And so they see that these things are just things that you need to do in order to build that resilience and be able to get through things. And so you start to see that if you influence very early on of around, like you'll see even in that risk space, yes, there is a small slippery dip within the train. Yes, there is a massive soft barrier. They have put a fence at the top of the stairs because these are all things that they can control. But kids are going to run around and play on a train anyway. Why not put them in an enclosed area with padded walls, right? Like for them, this is kind of a let them play. This is fun. Have that fun environment thing. They have a sense of community art. So for projects, if you want funding in the Finland to do any sort of development, 2% of your budget has to be spent on public art. So then you start to see these really creative artistic developments come about where you'll, the walkways that are covered with the lampposts are now turned into an artistic structure because they can claim that as part of their 2%. So instead of just having plain old boring lamp poles, we now have these amazing artistic lamp poles that walk all the way through the park, and remembering 6 months of the year they need the lights on during the day. And then they go, oh, well, if we're going to have to put lamp poles in the middle of the park, let's make sure they're all electrified so we can now have markets through there. So now this facility that was just a walkway once upon a time is now, their monthly market space where everybody can then plug into these collective spaces and light up their different exhibition areas and then demonstrate that artistic creativity as they move through. So I think it's just that mindset. The other one I said was around the verges on the side of the road. I mean, Helen, remember the people laughing at us in the bus going, like I've had that my entire life. Like I don't understand that. Explain to me again the logic of so you're putting a grass that's not native to your country on the side of the road, and then you have to go and mow it, but you don't have electric mowers, you've got diesel mowers, and so you're emitting carbon in mowing it by maintaining a foreign species that probably wasn't supposed to be there in the first place, that has absolutely no functional value or biological benefit to your society. And we go, yeah.
Yep.
Exactly. It's part of the idea of rewilding for them to keep biodiversity, for them to keep all their insect species. There's real concern that they are seeing nature collapse. And so the idea that you would they would have flower seeds, they would have a whole wide range of wilding areas. And I've got photos likewise, like Hayley from Belgium through to Netherlands through to Finland, of where there were park areas that were, thigh high in grasses that would be eventually cut at the end of the season. But yes, all the seed would then be dispersed and it would regenerate again.
Different way of thinking.
Another fun things too, Nicole, like the one example that I used at circularity was around housing development, centralized playground, that's where the bins are located, quite next to the playground. So you can take your kids down to play. The kids can actually drop the rubbish off. Not that there's much rubbish, because they have a 7-bin system.
Yes,
That you
I
can
remember that.
scan your household card to put in your separated rubbish. If they continually get things put in the wrong bins, they literally just run an education program from where that garbage that bin drop off collection center is. But I had a 4-year-old quite like laughingly explain to me how easy it is to use a 7-bin system. Like, what do you mean you don't understand how it works? This is
You're a grown-up. You're supposed to know these
I
things.
speak 5 languages and use a 7-bin system. What are you doing? Like, oh, sorry.
Oh, there's 3 more questions that have come in, Nicole, which is great. So shall I whiz through some of them? And Hayley,
Danielle
I think
wants to know what's the workforce upskilling that you mentioned. So what sort of areas would we be needing that in Australia?
And I've had to reacquaint myself with the report because I couldn't remember myself. There were a couple of things. We wanted to see that there were scholarship programs for international industry and policy-based research to accelerate shift to best practice. We wanted to see eco-design curricula integrated into universities and TAFEs and apprenticeships for design, production and procurement orientated professions. We wanted to see professional training and certification by industry organisations to include mandatory CPD on circularity and also executive training for decision makers so that decision makers could learn and understand about circularity and low emissions future and mentorship. So we actually considered the breadth of ways by which we bring broad number of decision makers already in the workforce to embrace circularity.
Yeah, great. And it's a really wonderful report. We'll give you that link to dive into. Carolina has said, thanks so much for this presentation. She's curious to know how long did Amsterdam take to reach this level of maturity? I feel like I want to say, from memory, it was like 5 to 8 years, something like that. 8 years.
I think it was a bit more. The first
10?
circularity report I think came out about 2016 or 2017.
Yeah. So if we were there last year, that was 2023. So that's 7. Well, Jacqueline was in Ministry of Environment for the country in 2007 to 2010. So we're going to say roughly, Carolina, it's between 8 and 10 years probably. And I guess arguably the recommendations that Helen has connected, because obviously you mentioned quite a bit eco-design in there, Helen, which of course we're seeing now in the EU regs that are coming out. So I think we've got an opportunity to leapfrog and sort of implement a lot of what you've mentioned there. And then the last question I think we might be able to get to is, amongst the EU's 27 member states, did you have a sense of which countries are more receptive to CE regulation and policy? How hard or easy would it be to move in a coordinated way amongst all the members? Thanks, Sandy, for your question. So which countries do you think? I think I've got my top 3, but
well, I think that they're going to be quite obvious to what we're going to come out, because they're all the countries we visited, right? So there's a reason why we went there. But I think, Sandy, the shortest way I can explain it is the EU political game is a microcosm of the global political game. So there are countries that are industrialized, there are countries that aren't industrialized, and everybody is looking to, from a political sense, they'll all say the things that they need to say to sort of get heads nodding and get that collaborative agreement. In a practical sense, they have the same troubles that everybody else does, in that, well, that's fine for you because you've already made your millions of dollars and build your industry up doing it the dirty way, and now we have to try and build it up the clean way. That being said, there are countries then taking advantages of their own skill sets in different areas and being able to capitalize on where some of these things are going. So to give you a quick example of that, they're using circularity in the Netherlands to tackle their modern slavery issues. So they realize that importing solar panels are largely coming from province in China that's well known for using slave labor. They want to try and eradicate using those panels. The only way to do that is by remanufacturing panels within the country themselves. So they're recovering all the old PV panels as they come out and then investing in big technologies in order to build that domestic remanufacturing capability up that solves their modern slavery problem, as well as going circular at the same time. So a lot of countries are using circularity as a means. So I think, in terms of sustainability is a what, circularity is a how to get there. And so they very much work in sync to be able to do that.
Yeah, thanks, Hayley. Great response. Well, we've got literally 2 minutes, probably a minute and a half left of this fantastic session today. Thank you so much for joining us and preparing all of that wonderful information for everybody that's joined us. Listeners, this actually concludes our delegate reflections of our European Study Tour learning series. So all of the recordings will be available on our YouTube channel. We are looking to plan a final webinar with a focus on what's changed in the 12 months since we've been in Europe with our colleagues from our supporting countries, but we'll have more on that in the coming weeks. But we'll be sending out today's recording, as I mentioned, with follow-up resources, including Helen's report. We didn't get to respond to the question of what you've done in the time since we've been away, but maybe we can add a few comments on that with our mail out next week if you've got some time. So thank you. You'll also see when you click end that there'll be some questions following the webinar. We'd really appreciate it if you could fill those in and provide us with some guidance on what you'd like to see us take some further action on with our webinar series moving forward. Thanks, as always, to our amazing ACE Hub team for coordinating, Roisin for putting all this together, and to Sam for being online today, and all of our comms team that provide support to create this series. And thank you again to everyone joining us today. Keep an eye out for the next event, and we look forward to supporting you. Good luck on your circularity journey, but we look forward to supporting you where we can and seeing you next time. So have a wonderful rest of the evening, rest of the day, and we'll see you again soon. Thanks again, Hayley and Helen.
Thank you.
Thank you. Cheerio.